Thanks, Haley, and thanks everybody for joining. So today I'm joined by Catie, who on my team leads coverage of the infrastructure and platforms space. She looks at vendors like AWS and Google, Oracle, amongst others. And we wanted to share some of the insights from the first version of the Cloud Infrastructure and Platforms Benchmark report that's available, published about less than a month ago, so it's fairly fresh. And really it's segmented into, today's session is segmented into two different discussions. First around the infrastructure as a service segment of the market, which is fairly consolidated around a handful of leading global providers, but still is really, it's much more than just looking at the big get bigger, if you will. It's about being the core of an ecosystem around cloud that we think is really important for the way that customers are consuming these services going forward. And so in addition to just having the raw infrastructure, it's about the ISVs, the managed service providers that are really bringing these solutions to life and driving the growth that we see in terms of the leading providers. And then secondly, a space that we see a lot of differentiation, a lot of vibrancy in terms of lots of different providers growing very quickly, using innovation and features and capabilities to differentiate their offerings from others, as well as just the breadth of different categories of services that we're covering within the platform as a service space, make it a lot more diverse. And so we'll go into that as well as part of today's session. So first, I want to set up the change in our coverage and give you some logic in terms of what we saw in the market and how we've aligned the research portfolio within cloud to reflect that. So first, on the left-hand side of the slide, this is the categorization that we've used for really the last decade plus in terms of the benchmarks and the vendor segments that we cover in the space. Started with public cloud, added hosted private, and hybrid came on more recently as we saw just a lot more blending of delivery methods, and that created more opportunity to orchestrate and connect data and workflows and services, regardless of whether it's on-prem or in the cloud and all the different flavors that go along with that. So it evolved a bit over time, but what we saw was, in terms of the delivery method, really public cloud is the majority, a significant share of how customers want to consume using the benefits of multi-tenancy and public cloud resources are more of a fit for more workloads than I think most customers would have even dreamed about 10 years ago. And so that's, you know, that continues to expand and grow. Hybrid is more of an expectation in the market today that it's a requirement, you know, regardless of whether customers want to standardize on a single cloud delivery method, single cloud provider. You know, in reality, that's not feasible given the complexity, acquisitions, business strategy, different availability, regions. All that really points to hybrid being a necessary way of orchestrating IT and cloud delivery. And so it's less of an independent segment to look at, more of a kind of common reality for most customers and what vendors need to cater to with their solutions. And so, you know, with that, those aspects of the delivery method side, we saw the functionality and the capabilities of the offerings being more important going forward than they have been previously. It's less about what flavor of cloud is right for the organization, still important, still part of the decision, but really it's about the outcome, the service, the capabilities of the offering that define, it's the most important aspect for these solutions. And so we've updated our cloud coverage to reflect that. On the top, you can see the software segments that we've included in the expanded SaaS coverage. And there's a complementary benchmark and webinar that we've already done to cover that. And then in the infrastructure and platforms segmenting the core infrastructure as a service, compute, store, network offerings from PaaS, which is a lot more diverse. It covers everything from software, database, app development, services, integration, and then lastly in the other, a little bit of a catch-all, but that's where a lot of the marketplace and brokerage tools that are offerings from a diverse set of providers fall in there. We're still looking at delivery method, a little less deep, but it still is a lens that you'll see, and we've pulled in some of that to today's discussion to look at what's public versus some of the other flavors of delivery methods that are available for these services. But really we saw from a customer perspective, the expectation that there's some flexibility in terms of whether it's a dedicated environment, public cloud environment, and that includes vendors that started as, in one rigid category or another. Lots of blending, lots of adding new capabilities to deliver it however the customer needs it to be delivered, but still have that core offering still that they're competing with in terms of the service and capability. And that's all from, still from some of the infrastructure as a service providers is where we see that diversity of delivery method. So with the first publication of the new infrastructure and platforms research, we're including 18 vendors. All of them are platform as a service participants. Some of them are infrastructure as a service participants. And so we have some segmentation you can see for where these are playing, and a lot of pure plays that are focused on one category, one element of the platform as a service market. So we're going to grow this over time, but this is a good snapshot for some of the leading providers in the different spaces to call out their financial performance, their business strategy, and provide that market context within the relevant segment for the analysis in the report. All right, so with that setup, I'll hand it to Catie to take us into some of the details that we saw as we published this first iteration.
Yeah, thanks, Allan, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So just kind of starting with this chart here we used in the report and kind of sets the stage for the whole benchmark and depicts really where we see the cloud infrastructure and platforms market today and where it will be in 5 years. And it is an inaugural view of the market. We do have the cloud infrastructure and platforms market forecast coming out in October. And so the benchmark will kind of complement that report. It will look out into 2026. It'll have some revisions to the numbers, and it'll go deeper into the different subsegments you'll hear us talk about today. But for the purposes of this benchmark, right now we see the total market exceeding well above $400 billion, about a 25% compounded annual growth rate. Now, about 80% of this is from infrastructure as a service, but naturally the growth is stemming from platform as a service. And over this period, really what was exacerbated by COVID is just a rise in data center consolidation and a growing number of customers refactoring or replatforming their applications as PaaS in the cloud. And customers, if there's a PaaS service based on open source technology, that's going to really be a de facto choice for many. So, and in terms of delivery method, steering away from that a bit, but public cloud traditionally has been standard for enterprises due to the cost benefits. But what we're seeing in our conversations with customers is that price is becoming less and less of a deciding factor. And it's really about the solution that will address the industry need in the specific application or the specific use case. And so for some customers, that may be private cloud. For some, it may be multi-tenant public cloud. And for some, it will be a mix of both. And so what we're finding is that the lines between these cloud delivery methods are getting really blurry, especially as hybrid multi-cloud really means different things to different customers. It's edges, it's data centers, it's clouds. It could encompass a co-location facility. So it's not black and white anymore like it was when cloud first started. And so that was kind of the rationale in us making the portfolio shift that we did, trying to focus more on the workload regardless of where it's deployed. And so now moving into the specific segments, obviously infrastructure as a service is a big piece of this, but we do want to highlight how we see that in terms of TBR coverage. In this benchmark, we're focused on the hyperscalers, AWS, Microsoft, GCP, but a really important and quite frankly emerging space is also these on-prem consumption-based infrastructure services. And that's something we highlight more in collaboration with TBR's IT infrastructure practice, formerly our data center practice. So, you're not going to hear us go deep into the Dells, the HPEs, the Lenovos in this report specifically, but we do have quite a bit of coverage in both existing and upcoming research streams from our IT infrastructure practice. So again, not included with us for the purposes of this report, but do want to reiterate that, these are cloud players, and it's an important market segment when we talk about cloud infrastructure, and we're definitely keeping a pulse on that in quite a bit of other areas throughout TBR.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction, even as we looked at the hosted private opportunity, which continues to be quite significant, both in terms of the size and the growth. For a lot of, at least on the vendor strategy side, we haven't seen this reflected as much from customers, given that just the recency of some of these new delivery methods. But it's about bringing some of the benefits of cloud, the ability to ship to an OpEx model, have consistency with public cloud resources, be able to scale on demand, have a dedicated supply chain. Those are all part of, whether it's AWS Outposts or Dell Apex, bringing that cloud-like experience to some degree with some trade-offs about where the device is located, how it's managed, and the sharing of resources, being more dedicated to that individual customer. So the blending, I think, is a common theme, and you can see the participants are quite broad, not only the hardware providers, but working in conjunction with a lot of SIs to actually package the infrastructure in a way that's consumption-based, some of the IP that can be automated and used for multiple different clients on the SI side. So I think the blending of delivery methods and roles and value propositions is something that extends well beyond just the vendors that we cover on the hyperscaler side.
Yeah, and so now taking that further, narrowing down to the vendors that we do include as part of this coverage. So here we have a typical TBR bubble chart looking at the IaaS revenue growth, comparing it to overall cloud revenue growth. And so for overall cloud, we include professional services and SaaS applications and some other businesses in total cloud revenue. So IaaS is growing faster than that naturally. So a couple takeaways here. Not surprising that AWS is our leader. Despite the revenue volume, they've maintained growth, benefiting quite a bit during the pandemic, and just brand name status for those on-prem lift and shift engagements. And their primary focus continues to be on getting revenue dollars at the bottom of the stack. And you see them trying to make their offerings more relevant in what we consider distributed IT, or all these different environments. EKS Anywhere is the best example I can think of. Essentially them bringing their managed Kubernetes service to customers in the data center. So, they can create and manage their clusters on-prem, but take advantage of the same control plane and the same public cloud experience. And so that's marketed as part of their hybrid portfolio along with, AWS Outposts. But it's important to note that how an AWS defines hybrid is still different than, say, how IBM defines it. IBM's Kubernetes service OpenShift can run anywhere, including across clouds and in the data center, versus AWS, this is really them just extending their public cloud service on-prem. So how the vendors define what is truly hybrid gives you a sense as to where they are. But in general, you see the overarching trend will be you see even in AWS, which is typically perceived as more prone to locking customers in, broadening their definition of hybrid. So on this chart as well, we have AWS, Microsoft, Google, Alibaba all in one corner, and then IBM and SAP in contrast. You see them lower in growth, but this is for infrastructure as a service. And in the PaaS segment, they're up a bit. In SAP's case, it's partly due to some inorganic growth, but with IBM, they're still very much committed to making OpenShift and additional software assets available across clouds. So almost an approach of, we want you to come to the IBM cloud, but we'll support you anywhere. So them willing to compromise on some opportunities in infrastructure as a service, but still driving business momentum in platform as a service. Versus, you have AWS, you'll see their IaaS and PaaS growth is really quite similar, but for an IBM, one is growing noticeably faster than the other. So just some different dynamics for the vendors kind of depending on their strategy. And then the last takeaway worth highlighting on this slide, I think, is Oracle. A little later to the cloud game, and want to iterate that this is off a very small revenue base, but we have them leading in growth in infrastructure as a service due to OCI and then also cloud at customer. In terms of private cloud, or what's sometimes referred to as local cloud as a service, they have the ability to allow customers to run their Fusion applications on-prem, and that's actually pretty unique for them. There's AWS Outposts, there's Azure Stack, which we would pretty much compare apples to apples with cloud at customer, but they do not have the application level support that Oracle does. So that's actually a differentiator for them at this time. At matter for Oracle, I think, is customers' willingness to potentially take on what would be a fourth cloud environment when you see how dominant AWS, Microsoft, and Google are, especially with the skill challenges going on right now. Maintaining one cloud environment and getting the right resources trained on one cloud is hard enough, and especially if on the vendor's part, they're more reluctant to shift to more open APIs and more open standards, which could really address some of these skill challenges that we're seeing. That could be a big turnoff for customers, and there could be some hesitancy to migrate there, but nonetheless, at this point, we see Oracle really trying to assert themselves in the IaaS space through OCI and play more on par with the big three. So here again, trying to highlight how the market is really rallying around these players. Over 60% AWS. Now, of course, the focus is on multi-cloud among these vendors for really large-scale hosting projects. And the top criteria in the vendor decision process continues to be around security, data location, and privacy. And third is often skills and emerging technologies. So on the AWS front, the overall stability and scalability of their software and really just an established experience in application hosting often makes them a go-to. And then in Microsoft's case, obviously, they benefit from the legacy software expertise that provides really a landing spot for most accounts. And customers often cite Azure as a head in areas like scalable database technology and IoT. And then, of course, Google Cloud has its strong reputation in AI, analytics, and machine learning. So each provider has its expertise, and customers are, in theory, going to migrate workloads to the cloud based on where that vendor is strong. And in terms of overall trends, when we look at this space too, in the report we touch upon the rise of serverless computing. Compute is typically the most surprising part of a customer's cloud bill. In the traditional model, customers are finding that it's really hard to anticipate how much they are running, and there's a lot of cost surprises in the number of VMs that ran and how long they're running and so on. So that's something we expect to see more on the vendor side as well. And then maybe also the cloud providers better responding to customers' need for greater resource pooling as well. Those that can effectively decompose pools of storage, networking, et cetera, to help the customer be more efficient and reduce costs. And the last thing to call out for infrastructure is how these vendors are addressing data sovereignty and security. Things like GDPR and China's data security law are having a big impact and driving up demand for cloud services to be delivered in customer-specific locations. And so a lot of the cloud providers have been really articulate in their plans to offer localized services to a broader audience of customers. As an example, AWS announced it is expanding its local zone footprint outside the US, and these facilities typically offer single-digit millisecond latency to support certain use cases. We also see Microsoft expanding in China, and you have solutions from IBM like Satellite to kind of bring cloud services back to the data center and address these challenges.
Yeah, just to jump in on that prior slide, going back to the pie chart. So this is the share within the benchmark vendors that we cover. As Catie mentioned, we're publishing a complementary market forecast using this taxonomy coming up in October. And with that, you're going to see more of the breadth of other providers and the amount of revenue that they're generating outside of this group of really it's 5 leading vendors here. And a lot of that is there's regional providers. Just thinking about Alibaba in China, there's a list of other local providers and partners for the global firms that are used there. There's smaller, especially on the hosted private. A lot of the role for partners is to offer whether it's VMware-based or other partner technology-based infrastructure for kind of tier 2 providers that cater to smaller customers, more hands-on service and management, backup recovery, all that built into kind of a managed offering. That's a partner strategy and a trend that we see. So there is a long tail of providers in the infrastructure as a service space that will kind of give more visibility into what that looks like with that upcoming report. And then the second thing that Catie's monologues sparked my memory was around the cost management. And in a lot of the customer interviews that we've been doing, the aspect of efficiency and optimization is really more, a lot of them have learned hard lessons with inefficiency and overcharging and just running services that don't add value to the business. And so there's another ecosystem of cost management, monitoring, optimization solutions that for a lot of the larger customers, they say, I'm not going to implement, I'm always going to use a third party to help me monitor and manage because whatever I'm spending with them, it's going to save me so much more. And I can demonstrate that it's an efficient use of resources to my board, my boss, and just reduce that spend wherever possible. And so that's another thing, a great thing that Catie mentioned, and we're definitely seeing it on the customer side. All right, sorry, back to you, Catie.
Yeah, no worries, thank you. So yeah, hopefully that provides a little context on the infrastructure segment and some of the themes that we're seeing and have touched upon in the report. Moving on to PaaS, as we talked about earlier, and is really our whole theme is that infrastructure is about scale, but the growth is stemming from PaaS, and this is where the innovation comes from. Really about empowering the developer directly, and then all the tools and services needed to reduce what is really becoming more complex. So this is the vendor landscape we've put together for PaaS, here mapping PaaS growth in absolute dollars to total benchmarked growth, so including platform and infrastructure. And again, it is the same players as in infrastructure, but also some new players. A big takeaway here is that when we look at AWS's total IaaS revenue, it trumps Microsoft by quite a bit. But when we look at just PaaS, it's almost the opposite. Microsoft is ahead of AWS. And at the beginning, we highlighted the 4 segments that we see as making up the PaaS market. And the first is the largest. It's what we'd call technology and systems management. So this is really the close-to-box software, the supporting infrastructure solutions that enable the application, the operating system, management tasks, orchestration. So when we say Microsoft leads in PaaS, it's largely stemming from this segment. And I think a big theme here, too, is how Microsoft as well as IBM are racing for the software control plane. It's something we've talked about a lot before in previous webinars, how they've really dominated the operating system with Windows and Linux. So now it becomes a matter of, okay, now we need to look up the stack and figure out a way to take share in this more abstracted hybrid multi-cloud world. And so from the customer's point of view, it's almost, do you go with Azure, kind of known for that front-end simplicity, or where IBM benefits, which is really through Red Hat, as well as that Z-base and all of the data that it contains. So this is the largest segment of what we'd consider as PaaS, over a quarter of benchmarked revenue. And then starting to move up, our next segment is application development and management. And this is one of our faster growing areas. This encompasses the tools offered by the cloud provider for enabling applications, increasing developer productivity. And I think a big trend worth highlighting here is just the momentum that we're seeing with Kubernetes. It's the de facto container management platform. It emulates a PaaS offering with deployment, scaling, load balancing, et cetera. And it's really valued by customers looking to address orchestration and management challenges across the IT landscape. And so as developers continue to create more microservices, Kubernetes relevance will grow, and it'll become even more important to have a common data framework. And kind of as a rule of thumb, IBM's CEO has articulated this well, is that it's probably right now about 70% of the total cost, and your people are tied up in maintaining what you have, and only about 30% is new. And in theory, it should be the inverse. And I think businesses are starting to see Kubernetes help that transition. And again, the biggest challenge, I think, at this point stems from lack of skills. And, Kubernetes is a really complex technology. And so I think just the lack of skills is still a barrier to adoption at this point. And our third category in PaaS is an important one. It's integration, commonly referred to as IPaaS. These are the offerings that enable the delivery of some sort of integration capability for benefits like data sharing or simplified management. And there's a lot of IPaaS specialists out there who have carved out a niche in the market with these pre-built connectors and tool sets that offer value. And I think they mostly offer value by helping clients avoid vendor lock-in. And we continue to hear that as really a top criteria for customers. And that's especially true as we talk about best of breed. Customers, we continue to favor best of breed applications. And so that really presents opportunities for these IPaaS vendors. The biggest trend that we're kind of monitoring in this space is how the more mature SaaS vendors are investing here to better connect the front office with the back office, And they really have the ability to invest beyond what we see as kind of more standard integrations and look to more automated API connections, so based on AI and ML technology. Microsoft is probably the best example here. They bought Clear Software, which is an IaaS specialist focused on SAP and Oracle systems, and they're folding that IP into their Power Platform. So you kind of see the more mature vendors acquiring here, and that could infringe on the pure play IaaS space a bit. In terms of the revenue positioning, the top hyperscalers are in here, but it's not necessarily a direct revenue focus. It's not substantial. A lot of that is still on the hands of partners, and we actually see Salesforce and Microsoft, Informatica, and others as leaders in here. Also ServiceNow, they stand out in this space with Integration Hub and their IT operations management product. And we see them kind of investing more in back-end automation, really to make it easier to connect all these systems across the line of business. And as we talked about before, best of breed kind of reigns supreme, but we see ServiceNow as very much best of suite. So it's interesting how they kind of use the Now platform, and they've been acquiring a lot in the past year to improve the back end, using the Now platform to expose kind of the cost challenges and the management challenges that are typically associated with integrating best-of-breed applications. So that's kind of the integration segment. Lastly, in PaaS, as Allan mentioned, we have the other segment, really to depict that there are a lot of workloads deployed as PaaS outside of, traditional systems management and app development scenarios that we typically associate with PaaS. So in here, the other segment, we're really focused on cloud brokerage tools, tools used by the end customer for tasks like aggregation and customization. And then the other key workload we track here is the cloud marketplaces. With a few exceptions, the marketplaces aren't typically big revenue drivers, but still really important in the go-to-market and the ecosystems that we're seeing play out in this space. So Allan, with that, let me hand it over to you to touch on some of those ecosystem trends.
Great. Thanks, Catie. So let me take you through this slide. So it's really a progression that reflects our change in coverage. So on the top, a lot of customers have gone through this journey where may have started with public cloud. It got more complex in terms of the workloads and the types of delivery methods that were fit for those, and ended up at hybrid IT. So, it's not a universal statement, but a lot of customers, the majority, I think, have gone through this progression and find themselves in some hybrid state where cloud is not 100% of their environment. It's, probably on average with the folks we speak with, 20 to 60% of what they spend their money on for IT, and they've made that shift over the last 10 years. And, for most of them, they don't see it getting to 90, 100% of the environment. There's still value in some of the on-prem delivered assets. If you look at from the vendor side, vendors like SAP still reporting solid uptake of traditionally delivered ERP solutions, even as more cloud options are available. So this is going to persist for quite some time. It's not flipping a light switch. However, as more of the environments have moved, you start to see these obstacles progress in terms of left to right on the bottom. And that's where the ecosystems and the platform as a service offerings really come in and play a critical role, because with just infrastructure as a service, you can reduce costs, you can delay costs. Those benefits have been around for quite some time, and if you do it right, you can achieve them. However, as you get into management, transformation, changing the culture, getting to a DevOps type environment where there's iteration and faster innovation, trialing of new solutions and coordination, those are all very difficult to do if you just take a technology lens. And so that's why we think, although infrastructure continues to grow, platform as a service really is going to play more of an important role in helping in this progression. So let me talk a little bit about how ecosystems play a part in that, because we're covering 18 vendors here. They do a lot for customers. They have significant revenue streams, compared to the rest of the industry. But really, what's driving the growth and will continue to sustain it is this ecosystem of other ISVs that are playing regional niche, industry customized roles in terms of filling gaps and doing custom development for customers. And so they're being orchestrated by some of the infrastructure as a service providers, leveraging the PaaS tools, the development tools, the marketplaces, to help them with go-to-market, to really to change the way that cloud is being delivered and consumed. So it's no longer, vast majority direct. There's so many instances where it's multiple different providers involved and involved in catering to customer needs. A couple clear examples Salesforce does is probably most mature in terms of the marketplace strategy and provides a lot of insight around their traction there. So from them, 86% of their customers consume resources from AppExchange partners. So that is just such a, it's a high percentage of their customer base that is not just engaged with them, but is delivering, but is consuming and investing in solutions from some of these partners that have, built on the platform, participate in the marketplace. And so it's important for those partners. It's also very important for Salesforce. And I think the other platform providers, AWS, Microsoft, Google, are all recognizing that value for their own business to increase renewal rates, to increase consumption, to reach new customers with value that is not just in their own offerings, but developed by the partners. Really, I think the value of that is unquestionable at this point, and it's driving a lot of the investment that we see in terms of their strategy, getting beyond just, selling consumption and participating in an ecosystem. And so a big focus around that. The other area that we're looking at is the drive to industry customization. So that can occur in a lot of different ways. The ecosystem, the marketplace strategy is part of that. But there's also a services component that really fills gaps, makes it more of a consumption-based managed service that ideally is what customers are looking for. In today's skill environment, it's difficult to hire and maintain in-house resources for the multi-cloud, the multi-ISV environments. So anything that can be consumed as a managed service, there's a lot of demand for that. And so the service providers of all different shapes and sizes are stepping up to capitalize on that opportunity. And so inherent in that is kind of a change of roles. We've seen it with channel partners, mentioned it with some of the hosted private activity. Channel partners typically involved in kind of implementing, reselling solutions, doing more hosting, providing cloud services directly to their mid-tier customers, smaller customers, with a high degree of service involved in that. And, even for the larger global systems integrators, packaging their own IP in a way that they haven't previously, acting a little bit more like an ISV in some aspects of their business strategy. We've done projects looking at the embedding of cloud solutions into, it's almost a white labeling OEM type motion that some SIs are involved with, leveraging the best cloud technology that's out there, and embedding that into a solution that can be packaged and reused for multiple different customers as part of their business strategy. All those things are really changing the traditional designations and roles and activities that we saw in the traditional IT model. And so there's this evolution on the provider side as well. It's not just customers transforming, it's the vendors themselves, and it's enabled by this PaaS layer and orchestrated by some of the largest providers in the ecosystem. So it's not just AWS continuing to drive consumption, it's the ecosystem play that really makes that a renewable source of growth and involves a lot more than just their platform to make it happen. All right, so that's the last content slide. There have been a number of questions that have come in throughout the session, but I'll pause here, kind of take stock of questions that we have in the queue. Feel free to submit some more, and Catie and I will spend a couple minutes going through and providing some feedback around what's come in. All right, so the first one would be, how would you compare IBM's OpenShift Anywhere strategy to VMware's strategy running on AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and just announced Alibaba Cloud?
Yeah, I think I can take that one. VMware, we're seeing that they're clearly trying to address the pain point that, okay, code is containerized, scanned, and ready to run, but now it needs to be managed and secured. They have Tanzu Mission Control really as the operational control plane for Kubernetes. The problem is the market is competitive with OpenShift. On IBM's earnings 2 days ago, they said OpenShift is up to 4,000 clients, and a good chunk of which I'd expect are in the cloud. And so, Red Hat, being with Kubernetes from the beginning is the big benefit here and to their advantage. I think for VMware, though, they could be perceived as, okay, they brought virtualization into the mainstream decades ago, and they're positioned to do the same thing with Kubernetes. They also recently launched container runtime protection, a new service, I believe, available through the premium edition of VMware Carbon Black Cloud Container Solution, which became available last year. And so, customers, including DevSecOps teams, and DevSecOps is also a really emerging trend, can take advantage of, automated image scanning and threat detection for these workloads natively built in the cloud. And I think that release is important because it just reaffirms, VMware's vendor agnostic strategy as the company offers, a security solution that complements the hyperscalers managed Kubernetes offerings as well. So not trying to replace them, but complement them. So, naturally, VMware would prefer customers adopt Tanzu Kubernetes Grid as the underlying engine, but it's clearly more concerned with supporting strategic offerings, including Carbon Black with really the control plane layer through Tanzu Mission Control. So definitely a competitive space, but with the things they're doing with Tanzu, definitely headed in the right direction.
Thanks, Catie. See, I think this is another one that you can answer, Catie. So the question is HPE GreenLake an example of what you're speaking about in terms of IaaS for non-public, which I guess would be hosted private? And then if so, how do you reconcile financial impact of storage compute spend for hyperscalers versus private cloud flex model offerings?
Yeah, knowledge on HPE is a little less than some of my data center colleagues, but we definitely include that in the cloud components coverage and throughout the IT infrastructure coverage. In terms of we consider that a cloud-ready solution, on-premise, as a service, OpEx type model, just not included in the infrastructure as a service taxonomy we're talking about for the purposes of this benchmark.
Got it. Yeah, and I have some thoughts on the reconciliation of the customers looking at the cost of hyperscale resources versus the HPE GreenLake and like solutions. I'll categorize it. So kind of that traditional hardware with as a service consumption pricing and management solutions that are included in the package. So it is a bit of a premium. So it's not, again, a lot of customers are no longer simply thinking about cost as, getting the lowest cost possible for a lot of these decisions. So it fits certain circumstances where on-prem makes sense. There's a dedication, it's within an existing facility or a co-location provider. So there's a lot more delivery and dedication benefits. But that said, it's not just, changing the pricing for a box that goes into your data center. There's a management console that helps, it's a PaaS-like layer for some of the multi-cloud, multi-environment management that goes into it. The other value that we've heard customers perceiving in those types of solutions is especially over the last 2 years, dedicated supply chain for expanding capacity, managed service, so that it's not a burden on the IT resources to manage and maintain it. All those things, really go into how these decisions are made. So it's not just a cost consideration. In that case, a lot of times the public cloud resources are going to be less expensive. However, there's other elements of the package that really is what the HPEs and Dells, Lenovo's are trying to emphasize as part of these solutions. All right, let's see, probably time for one more question. There's a question around dealing with PaaS being heavily customized and the danger of vendor lock-in. So certainly I can start in. Catie probably has some Kubernetes feedback around this one, because it's definitely a consideration that, for all elements of the cloud environment that's being consumed, having, multiple different providers, at least to some degree, there's still going to, most times a favorite, largest provider within the organization. And a lot of that just owes to skills, experience, and the scaling of the services that have been initially deployed. But they are definitely looking at long-term having the ability to change strategy, to change providers. It's not a, switching prices arbitrage type decision from a cost perspective, but they do, just for their own long-term security and viability for a lot of the services that are being run, looking to have multiple providers, looking to have technology that helps make those multi-vendor environments, work in coordination. And so I think that sets up probably Catie to go into some of the Kubernetes strategy and the role that it's playing for customers.
Sure. Yeah, I think customers frequently early on ask themselves, should we be containerizing this? And the reason they do that is because they want to see if they can have easy migration across clouds and find out too, does one workload truly run better in one cloud versus another? And I think in our talks with customers too, they found certain vendors have not necessarily been helpful in that regard because, some infrastructure as a service vendors don't necessarily want customers to containerize, and the obvious reason being they want to lock them in. But, customers don't want that, and I think, the AWSs and the Oracles and others as well are catching on to that. And again, like the EKS Anywhere announcement, I think was a big step in that direction, and they're probably going to make it available across clouds as well. So you see, more entrance into that space to really address what is this issue of trying to avoid vendor lock-in.
Great. Thanks, Catie. All right. Haley, at this point, I'll hand it off to you. Thanks for all the questions. We'll continue to submit them. We can always follow up via email, and thanks again for attending.
Thanks, Allan. Thanks, Catie. All right, everybody, thank you so much for attending. Please feel free to reach out to the team with any follow-up questions. If you have a few moments, it would be super appreciated if you could fill out the survey on your screen. The replay version of today's webcast will be available after the event and will be sent out to all of you via email. And be sure to join us on Thursday, May 5th for our next webinar in our series, Blockchain, Sustainability, and IT Services. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.